Hey guys, Who here? I'm back with another Get to Know Co video. This video I'm going to talk about core infantry. I may circle back around to each individual unit at some point, but for now, I'm going to cover some things that apply to all units. In my opinion, all of the core infantry is fairly well balanced, and it really comes down to how you use them and whether you're using the units properly, than maybe one unit being particularly more powerful than another. I do want to give a quick rundown of some stats that apply to all infantry. All core infantry models have 80 health, so each of these little guys has 80 health. Each member of the squad also has what's called a target size. This plays into what's called their received accuracy. You may have seen that in forum posts or on Reddit. The bigger the target size, the more likely a unit is to be hit. So small squads, say like Grenadiers here, have a target size per model of 0.89, while large squads like the 6-man conscript squad have a target model or target size per model of about 1.09. These values change from unit to unit. As squads get veterancy, they typically get bonuses or reductions to their overall received accuracy. So that makes them be able to last a little bit longer without really affecting their health. I hope that's not too confusing, but I'll touch more on this in this video, and as I get into other videos, I'll talk about it a little bit later. One side note is that received accuracy only applies to small arms fires, so that's going to be machine guns, rifles, things like that. Tank shells, mortars, explosives, those things don't use received accuracy values. So an explosion on one Grenadier model is going to kill him, 80 health. Going to kill him just as much as an explosion on one conscript model is going to kill that one conscript model. So I don't want to get too nitty gritty into these stats, but I do want to cover a few generic bits of info about each squad. So starting with the Grenadiers, both the Volksgrenadiers and the regular Grenadiers that you see here are going to excel at long-range combat. Folks in particular are going to excel when they're either in green cover or in a building, and I'll talk about that, why that is here in a little bit. Conscripts are a 6-man squad. They excel at medium and short range combat, particularly excel behind green cover, also in buildings. I'll talk about why that is in a little bit. And moving on, we've got Riflemen. Riflemen excel also at medium and short range combat. They are, compared to the rest of the core infantry lose 50% of their accuracy when they're firing on the move. So as these guys move and fire, 50% of that accuracy is down the tubes. Riflemen only, I guess you could say, lose 40% of their accuracy when they're moving. So not quite as bad, so they're a little bit better on the move. Plus, if you equip weapons like a BAR from weapon racks, BARs only lose about 30% of their accuracy when you're moving. Lastly, let's talk about the British, the infantry section, or the Tommies. They've got increased damage per second when either fighting in yellow or green cover and also buildings. This unit is particularly bad when fighting in open cover, though. So we'll talk about how to use these here in a minute. So let's talk a little bit about cover. Yellow cover, of course, shows up as these yellow boxes, which I imagine if you're watching this video, you're already aware. Yellow cover reduces incoming accuracy, so that's these guys. As they're shooting, if they were to shoot at these Tommies here, only 50% of their shots would hit compared to if they were standing out here in the open. Let's talk a little bit about green cover. Green cover not only gives you the 50% accuracy reduction, but it also gives you a reduction in damage. So each shot that hits now only does 50% of the damage that would have normally done, again, compared to them standing either in the open or in yellow cover. So I mentioned earlier that the conscripts and the Volksgrenadiers are particularly good from fighting from cover. Because they have these larger squads, now that each of them is only taking 50% of the damage they normally would have, it's an even larger bonus when you're talking about 6 models compared to, say, 4 models. So you always want to be in green cover, but particularly conscripts and Volksgrenadiers excel when you're fighting from green cover. I do want to cover a couple dangers associated with yellow cover. As you notice, right now this squad is pretty well spread out. So if one mortar hits, you're probably gonna, if it hit directly on this guy here, you'd probably damage this guy, but these other two would probably be okay. However, as you notice, when you get into, say, yellow cover here, everybody clumps up. So if there's craters, any kind of yellow cover, everybody clumps up. One mortar hit when you're in yellow cover is going to do massive damage. That one hit could potentially wipe the squad if they were already low. Similarly, rifle grenades, very dirty whenever you're in cover. Yellow cover, that is. However, if you go and you get into green cover, yes, they're clumped up, but at least they're only going to take 50% of the damage. And that's also from mortar shells or other explosives that might have hit them. They only take, again, 50% damage. Before I get into buildings, I do want to cover one last tidbit about the British infantry sections, and that is that they typically cover is directional, meaning if they're standing here and my grenadiers shoot at them, since they are behind this cover, they are not going to take the damage that, or rather they get the bonuses. So they 50% accuracy and 50% damage. However, if, say, for example, these riflemen, for whatever reason, were shooting at this British squad, because they're not behind the cover, they're going to take damage, of course, from the side. The one interesting thing about the Tommies is that they get their bonus, so they get bonuses to how quickly they fire, how accurately they fire when they're in cover. Those bonuses apply even if you're standing in cover. So if you don't have cover to get behind, or it's not practical to get behind cover, even standing like this, they're going to get those increased rate of fire standing here, or if they're standing in this yellow cover here, they're going to get those bonuses whenever that icon is above their head, even if they're not getting the bonuses associated with the cover itself. Buildings. Buildings, from what I've been told, have some interesting damage profiles and some interesting bonuses that can make it a little bit difficult to calculate exactly what kind of a bonus that you get from being within a building. Generally, though, my opinion is that it's going to be basically as good as green cover, but or maybe better, but from all directions. There are a couple interesting things that I do want to point out about buildings, and why some squads may fare better in buildings than others. Of course, a 6-man conscript squad is going to be great in a building because, similar for green cover, you have those reductions in accuracy and damage when you're in a building. However, not all buildings are created equal. As you can see, this building here only has 5 windows on the outside. The models, when they're in a building, will only actually shoot out of the visible windows. So if I were to, say, attack this house from this truck here, all 5, or all, in this case, all 4 models are going to be attacking me here. However, if I were to attack from this side of the building, there's only going to be 3 that can shoot at me. So if I had a conscript squad in this building, their damage is going to be cut in half compared to, say, if I were fighting from this side. So that's an important thing to know. Sometimes smaller squads like Full Grenadiers, where they can take advantage of all the windows, are going to get your maximum DPS, damage per second, coming out of these windows, compared to, say, another squad that might be losing some of their DPS by having a model that's maybe facing out of another window. So let's get into some tips. The first thing I want to talk about is buildings and building control. As I'm sure you're aware, and as I talked about earlier, buildings are a quite strategic position. One thing that you can do to know whether or not a building is safe to get into is simply to right-click on it with a squad. When you issue that move order, if it flashes red like that, that means that someone is in that building, whether you can see them through the fog or not. If I take the fog of war off, indeed, there's an MG in there. Also, if it's an MG, if you click on the building, you actually see the indicator saying, hey, this is the MG and where it's positioned to fire. This may or may not get patched soon, so don't count on that. So far, right-clicking on the building has been something that's been around for a while. I'm not exactly sure whether or not that's going to be patched. So if that's all been patched, maybe in another patch, there is one tip that you can do, at least in the early game, the opening movements. If you see that the windows are broken in these buildings, you know that someone has gotten into it. In fact, the windows that are broken here are going to be the windows, should be anyway, where there are soldiers. You see broken window there, and in fact, there is a guy standing there ready to shoot. One thing I also want to talk about is knowing who you're playing against and knowing your unit's limitations. So if I were playing, say, as Soviet against maybe an OKW player, I know that my first unit is going to be either combat engineers or some conscripts, or maybe I will have built an MG. I know in my initial capping that the most likely unit I'm going to run into is going to be some Sturm Pioneers. One thing that you'll notice as you approach the capture radius, and I've issued a command for the enemy squad to get over here and capture, so we'll wait just a minute. This circle will actually begin to turn red. And so, yeah, maybe you know that they're capping, but if you use a little bit of strategic thinking, you can realize, hey, the odds are that this is going to be a Sturm Pioneer. So if I charge these conscripts in to where these Sturm Pioneers are going to be, they're going to get shredded. So instead, what you should do is maybe take some time while you're building while you're capturing a sector to maybe build a fighting pit, build some sandbags, get into green cover, and let them push to you. Let's take a look what happened here. It looks like these guys, they decided to give up. I'm going to make an edit here, and we'll see if we can demonstrate that. Hang on one second. So I've set an enemy squad up to capture a territory, and we can see on the minimap here that this territory is actually flashing. If you use your tactical map, you see that that area within here is starting to flash. So I know that there's enemy here capturing. And if this is the start of the game, the odds are, if I know I'm playing OKW, again, is going to be Sturm Pioneers. So if I rush in, I'm almost certainly going to lose that fight. So what's the better idea? Go ahead and position yourself behind cover, maybe build some sandbags, something like that, and wait for them to push to you. Because otherwise, if you don't have support, you know that you're probably going to lose that engagement. Okay, so great. You've set up the perfect ambush. You hid your Sturm Pioneers behind a tree and then popped out right at the last second to surprise the squad. And you know there's no way that these conscripts are going to beat your Sturm Pioneers this close range. Great. That's awesome. One thing that I see even sometimes top-tier players forget to do is go ahead and position their squad for a wipe. So let's simulate that here. If I make this an enemy squad, I know that my Sturm Pioneers are going to shred these guys. But I also know that he's going to retreat soon, or would retreat if it was a person. So I'm going to go ahead and position this squad, and I'm really a little bit late, but go ahead and position this squad so that by the time he does get around to retreating, my squad is already going to be blocking him between his retreat path back to the base. Okay, there is one last thing I do want to talk about that I see a lot of newer players do with their Volksgrenadiers. The Volksgrenadiers, of course, have a Panzerschreck option. You can upgrade to give them, obviously, anti-tank capability. However, I see a lot of players, as soon as they have the munitions, go over here and click, and they go ahead and give them this bazooka. Of course, you'd have teching time in a normal match. So, great. This guy's got a Panzerschreck. He can fight tanks now. However, all of a sudden, in one click, if there aren't any vehicles on the field, you've immediately taken away 1/5 of your anti-infantry capability. So now, all of a sudden, this 5-man squad is basically as good as a 4-man squad if you're fighting infantry. So if you can, wait to add things like, say, bazookas or Panzerschrecks to squads, and be careful about picking them up if you aren't facing any kind of vehicles yet. So let's talk a little bit about some engagements that you would run into. Of course, the first thing I want to point out about this engagement is it's best to realize when you're going to lose an engagement. So if I were to come across this engagement with my Riflemen versus 4 Volksgrenadiers and 4 Riflemen, I'm probably not going to win this engagement. I'm just going to lose manpower if I don't either have support coming on the way, maybe a machine gun or another squad coming on the way, or if I'm not in, say, green cover or a building or something like that, it really doesn't make a lot of sense for me to just stand around. And the best option for me would be to soft retreat, go back, link up with another squad, maybe see if I could get into a building. It's not always bad to fully, or rather, it's not always bad to stick around even when you will lose if you can tie up two squads. So if I've got these two squads wasting time shooting at my one squad, but if I'm not in green cover, if I'm not in a building or something like that, I'm really not going to be trading effectively, meaning that they're going to be killing me a lot faster than I'm going to be killing them, and it's going to come out in favor of the people I'm shooting at. So, now that I've gotten that out of the way, there are a couple things I do want to point out. If you've just moved your squad into, say, two squads, maybe these were wounded or I thought that I could win this engagement, it's very important to take a look at where your individual models are shooting. If I've purely positioned them here, or I've moved them, attack moved them here, you never know exactly where these guys are going to shoot. As you can see, these 1, 2, 3 models here are shooting at this squad, but these two guys are shooting at this squad. So if I'm trying to wipe this already wounded squad, this only has 4 men, this isn't going to be the way to do it. I'm going to need to manually click to target, and as I do that, you see these two other riflemen now are finally firing in the same direction. By the way, I have these squads as invincible, so that's why they're not taking any damage. So now that I've got my guys all firing in the same direction, the next thing I like to do is issue a stop order, particularly when you're running into a situation with multiple squads. If you don't issue that stop order, if this squad is to soft retreat or automatically retreat, all of a sudden these riflemen are going to follow them. Who knows where they'll follow them? Back into an MG, into a mine or demo charge or something like that. So it's always best, once you've manually issued that attack order, to issue that stop order to make sure they're going to stay put and they're not going to run around like a bunch of idiots. One quick note before I talk about buildings is if you use the dump button or the unload selected troops, you kind of have no idea which door they're going to go out of. So one thing that you can do if you want to make sure they get out of the right direction, if you either click the squad up top here, or if you click the building and then use the tab key to select the squad inside of the building, you can make sure that they get out of the building that you're wanting. Alright, that covers what I've got for core infantry. Is there something that I missed? Is there something I said that was wrong? Please let me know in the comments below, and I will make sure that I get that corrected. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Ba bam bam ba dam bam.